The moment I knew things were about to go sideways came on a Thursday morning, just after my third sip of coffee, when my monitoring dashboard lit up with an unauthorized credential request. Admin level. Root access, not a scheduled test, not internal maintenance, a brute request from someone named Connor V. LWD trying to tunnel into my infrastructure like a raccoon in a trash can. I didn't flinch. Just closed the dashboard, opened my internal compliance log, and quietly documented it. No emotion, no panic. You don't yell when someone jiggles your front door at 3 a.m. You flip on the porch light and let the deadbolt speak. I'd built every square inch of Larkwell's backbone with the same logic. No loud alarms, just fail-safes built into fail-safes. Every clause and credential tucked inside layers of legal armor. Before we go on, just a quick ask. If you're listening and haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. It makes a huge difference to the team. Same with hitting the like button. Seriously, 97% of listeners never subscribe, and it means the world to us when you do. Back to the fire about to start. See, Larkwell Dynamics looked sleek on the outside. Clean UI, investors who love to talk synergy, and executives who couldn't tell a gateway timeout from a coffee break. But underneath, it was my architecture that made their scale-fast dream possible. I'd built the hybrid stack from scratch during a brutal growth phase, moving them from local servers to a modular cloud infrastructure with zero downtime. No manual could teach that kind of build. You had to feel the system to know where it could break, and preemptively close those cracks. 5 years ago, I spotted an opportunity. We were restructuring a legacy data mart, and I floated an idea during a board-aligned dev sync. What if we carved out our back-end deployment tools and spun them off as a service? Isolated, licensed, redundant. Legal was hesitant at first, until I pitched it as an IP-resilient disaster buffer. If the company ever faced a breach, a hack, or even a hostile acquisition, our infrastructure would remain stable because it was technically external. The GC signed off. Finance loved the budget model. My LLC, Tersus Systems, was born 3 weeks later. I spent nights building, testing, patenting. Larkwell licensed the system quarterly. Every renewal on time, every clause enforced. It gave them security, gave me control, and nobody batted an eye. Not the CTO, not the board, not the founder. As long as the system ran like a dream, nobody cared who held the keys. They just assumed I was still in-house, that I worked for them. They forgot I worked with them. Until Connor. Connor was the kind of VP you could smell before he entered a room. Cologne, bravado, and the scent of buzzwords he didn't fully understand. Hired from some fintech rocket ship that fizzled in 6 quarters. His blazer sleeves were always too short, and his mouth ran long. On day 3, he pinged me on Slack with zero greeting. Need full admin access to the platform. Doing an audit. That was it. No context, no hello, no idea what he was walking into. I took a screenshot, sent it to my legal contact, then replied, per agreement between Larkwell and Tersus Systems LLC, platform credentialing remains with the license holder unless board-authorized access is requested in writing. He replied, in full caps, this isn't a game. Actually, it was, and I knew every rule on the board. And now, so would he. I've seen VPs come and go, freshly hired disruptors with oversized confidence and zero institutional memory. But Connor, he wasn't just new. He was arrogant in a way that suggested he never once had to rebuild a server cluster at 3 a.m. because a firmware update bricked half the network. The kind of guy who thought infrastructure meant Wi-Fi and thought anyone who disagreed with him just wasn't thinking agile enough. He strutted through his onboarding like he owned the place. Called me tech lead in meetings, introduced himself to my own team with phrases like, let's align synergies. By the end of day 2, he'd already rebranded a Confluence page with a new logo. Day 3, that's when he came for the keys. Slack ping, no greeting, no context, just, need full admin access to your platform stack. I'm doing an audit. My first reaction? None. Not even a raised eyebrow. I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed slowly and deliberately. Hi, Connor. The platform is licensed through Tersus Systems LLC, not directly owned by Larkwell. As per Section 3.2 of the license agreement, admin access is restricted to authorized personnel designated by the license holder, unless board-level authorization is obtained. 3 seconds later. Haha, this isn't a game. Don't make me escalate. That haha told me everything. He thought this was a power play, that I was just another staffer guarding her little kingdom, that he could scare me into compliance with corporate bark and startup swagger. I didn't respond in Slack. I opened my local folder. Tersus LDW license master PDF and attached it in an email to our general counsel, Helena. Subject line: Request from Connor Vale, Section 3.2 relevance. No commentary, just facts. Then I printed a copy for myself and slipped it into the red folder in my bag, the one I kept for physical copies of things people like to pretend didn't exist. I'd written that clause myself, years ago, with 2 lawyers and a compliance analyst. We'd argued over wording for a week, landed on airtight phrasing. Credentialing authority remains with the license holder, non-transferable without executive board approval in writing. That clause had been initialed twice, once by the prior CEO and once by the chairman. It had held through 2 system upgrades, a hostile M&A attempt, and 3 outside audits. Connor wasn't going to override it with a Slack ping and a smirk. By 4 p.m., I got the read receipt from legal. Nothing else. Just a small gray check mark that meant message received, discussion incoming. Meanwhile, Connor decided to go loud, started pulling people into threads, forwarding emails, pinging IT security like they were his personal cleanup crew. Urgent credential sync. Platform access pending. Blocking operational transparency. He wanted to make it look like I was the bottleneck, that I was hoarding access, being difficult. But the thing about holding the contract is, you don't have to shout. You just wait. My systems kept humming. Deployments ran. Access logs stayed clean. No escalation from legal. No call from the board. But Connor kept rattling the cage. He had no idea that the cage was welded shut, with my name on the lock. Friday morning, 9:03 a.m., calendar invite. Security sync. Urgent. No agenda, no context, just Connor's name on the invite and the CTO CC'd like some kind of corporate muscle. I'd seen this move before. Ambush meeting dressed up as alignment. It's what people do when they think pressure equals power. I brought a copy of the license agreement anyway. Printed, highlighted, tabbed. When I stepped into conference room C, Connor was already seated, legs crossed like he'd just won something. The CTO, Mark, was tapping on his tablet, avoiding eye contact like he knew he didn't want to be there. Connor gestured to the seat across from him with that smug little twitch people get when they think they're the smartest one in the room. He didn't even let me sit before starting. Due to operational concerns, he began, slow and rehearsed, we're requiring full root access to the entire platform stack, immediately. I blinked, once, then opened the red folder on the table, slid the contract forward. My voice was level. You're requesting admin access to software that was designed, developed, and licensed externally, through my LLC. You can call it internal, but the board knows better. This is contractual software, and access is governed by the license you've already been billed for. Connor didn't even glance at the paper. We're assessing viability, he said. Waving a hand like that explained anything. And frankly, if we can't get visibility, we may need to review whether this setup is viable moving forward. That part he delivered with a grin, the kind that only works when the other person is scared. I wasn't. I stood up, slowly, closed the folder. You'll want to loop in the board, I said, before you threaten frameworks you clearly haven't read. Mark looked like he was swallowing a cough. Connor chuckled like he'd expected me to fold, like this was a power game and I'd blink eventually. But here's the thing. When you own the infrastructure, you don't play chicken with someone else's car. You step out of the road and let them drive it straight into a wall. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't raise my voice. But I did pause at the hallway corner long enough to watch the CTO whisper something to Connor with a face like someone had just poured cold water down his back. Connor didn't respond. Just stared at the door I just walked through like it hadn't gone how he rehearsed. By the time I got back to my desk, legal had replied to my earlier email with a one-line acknowledgement. Contract reviewed. No conflict on your end. I added it to the folder. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But it was no longer a question of if they'd overstep. It was when. That afternoon, while Connor was probably strutting through another alignment huddle or renaming a spreadsheet something visionary like Phase Matrix, my attorney fired off a note to the board's legal liaison. No emotion, just the facts. Subject line: Reaffirmation of licensing terms. Tersus Systems LLC. Attached were 6 PDFs. The master licensing agreement, signed, initialed, and dated by the previous CEO and board chair. The quarterly invoice schedule with confirmation receipts. The access log audit for the past 12 months showing not a single credential misuse. And the clause. The one that mattered more than all the posturing in that conference room. Operational control and credentialing authority shall remain solely with Tersus Systems LLC unless expressly revoked via board-approved buyout or mutually agreed transfer of license. Clear, absolute, enforceable. No room for fintech peacocks or passive-aggressive access demands. By 3:42 p.m., the general counsel, Helena, opened the email during a leadership sync. She was known for being unshakable, Yale-trained, court-honed, voice like glass. I'd only seen her flinch once, when a Series B term sheet used the word unsecured without context. But this time, she didn't flinch. She froze. Stopped mid-sentence while walking the execs through some funding compliance notes, then slowly scrolled down, scanned the clause twice, tilted her head, and said, "Pause. We need to read something." Then she projected it. The room went quiet. She didn't raise her voice. She just read it aloud, word for word. Every eye in that room shifted, first to the screen, then to Connor. He tried to lean back like it was no big deal, but the twitch in his jaw gave it away. The CTO looked like he wanted to become part of his chair. Someone asked, "Is this accurate?" Helena answered with a single nod. Connor muttered something about antiquated systems and legacy barriers, but it didn't land. Not with a clause that clear, not with an active license, not with the invoice attached showing we were fully paid through Q3. And just like that, the conversation turned. No more posturing, no more platform viability, just silence and legal air getting sucked out of the room. Later that night, I got a short email from Helena. "Terms are intact. Proceed as usual. Loop me in if pressure escalates." I didn't reply, just filed it away. It wasn't just that I had leverage. It was that they finally realized it. And now, every move they made had to tiptoe around the one document they never thought to read. By Monday morning, Connor was no longer laughing. He was digging. I got wind of it from an old friend on the procurement team. She sent a vague Slack emoji in the shape of a dumpster fire, followed by, "He's pulling 2018 archives like he's gonna find a golden clause." Apparently, Connor had spent most of the weekend trawling through old SharePoint folders and finance platforms, trying to trace the origin of Tersus Systems like it was a misplaced vendor record instead of the foundation holding up their entire digital house. He looped in procurement with a cheerful subject line. Quick clarification. RIA ownership of infrastructure stack, as if this was some casual detail that had just slipped through the cracks. He wanted emails, invoices, onboarding tickets, something, anything that said they'd ever formally brought the platform in-house. Spoiler, they hadn't, because that was the point. Tersus was never internal. It had always been a licensed external entity. That's why the clause existed. That's why the quarterly payments went to a separate EIN. That's why the license was reviewed by legal before the last CEO signed it. But when someone like Connor smells a threat, they start believing their own fantasies. He needed to believe this was a paperwork mix-up, that he could fix it with enough forensic flag waving. So he called in IT compliance. The poor guy from compliance looked like he hadn't slept since Y2K. "Was this system ever formally transitioned back to internal assets?" he asked in the meeting notes I was forwarded. The answer? Nope. Never. The CTO got pulled into a side meeting. His face reportedly went from pink to sheet white in 3 seconds flat. At one point, someone from finance whispered, "Wait, did we buy it? Or did we just rent it?" And then came the kicker. Quarterly payments from Larkwell to Tersus Systems, up to date. No arrears, no pauses, every invoice marked paid. Which meant the contract, signed, renewed, current, was fully enforceable. I wasn't holding their system hostage. They were a tenant, and the lease was still active. The panic started small. just a few follow-up emails, a Slack message to legal with vague curiosity, a Google Doc titled Contingency Planning Infrastructure Rebuild. Then came the internal calls with muted mics and phrases like worst case scenario and platform dependency risk. They were trying to spin a new narrative, that maybe it was time to modernize, move off Tersus, diversify risk. But that's the thing about panic in a closed system. It spreads like fire in a vent. Because no matter how fast they searched, the answers stayed the same. It wasn't theirs. It had never been theirs. And now they knew it. Sunday morning, 7:42 a.m., before most executives had brewed their first artisan pour-over, an associate from the legal team flagged something that turned the smoldering panic into a 5-alarm fire. Clause 4.2b, buried near the end of the agreement. Simple, undeniable. In the event of hostile access demand without board consent, immediate suspension of services is permitted. Notice of revocation must be delivered within 72 hours of first unapproved demand. Not suggested. Permitted. Translated into plain English, if anyone with executive authority attempted to force access to my infrastructure without full board sign-off, I had legal grounds to cut the cord. Fully. Completely. No warning required. By then, Connor had made 3 such demands, all documented, all logged, and all falling well within the definition of hostile access under the agreement's own glossary section. The clock had started ticking on Friday, which meant they had until Monday morning, 72 hours before my uptime obligations legally expired. After that, if I pulled the plug, it wasn't sabotage. It wasn't even a breach. It was enforcement. And everything they ran, payroll, HR, ops, customer service intake, logistics queues, internal databases, was tied directly into my platform stack. There wasn't a single department that wouldn't go dark. They couldn't even push an all-hands email without my system authenticating the outbound server. I hadn't designed it to be a chokehold, just efficient. But when someone tries to rip the foundation out from under you without reading the manual, you don't need to scream. You just need to let gravity do the rest. Word spread quietly that Sunday. Legal went silent. The CTO canceled his weekend retreat. Procurement stopped replying to Connor's follow-up threads. Even the junior devs started picking up on it. The code repo access logs showed elevated review activity, but no changes, no updates, like they were afraid to touch anything. Connor, from what I heard, still hadn't put it together. He was too busy fuming about Shadow It and trying to schedule a Monday meeting titled Mitigating Platform Risk Exposure, like that would erase the 3 separate access demands he'd already made. By noon, Helena, General Counsel, had added a second clause reference to her running brief for the founder, Clause 7.4, Notification of legal liability in event of service disruption due to breach of licensing protections. Translation. If they triggered a shutdown, the liability wasn't on me, it was on them. And worst of all for Connor, that clause was initialed by him, buried in his onboarding packet, signed digitally with a cheerful DocuSign click. I didn't need revenge, just a calendar and a countdown. Monday, 7:08 a.m., the email landed in my attorney's inbox like a white flag disguised as a calendar invite. Subject, exploratory call. Future terms and collaboration. The body was short, almost sheepish. We'd like to schedule a brief, informal conversation to ensure we're all aligned and can move forward on the same page. Hoping to maintain a productive relationship with Tersus Systems. No threats, no demands, just a vague plea for alignment and an unmistakable hint of panic between the lines. They didn't ask for access this time. Didn't mention viability or compliance hurdles. Just amicable terms and next steps. Translation, they'd finally read Clause 4.2b and understood that time was up. I didn't join the call. Didn't need to. My attorney replied with a single sentence, when she and I had workshopped Saturday night over chamomile tea and a printed copy of the agreement. Our client will continue operating under the original licensing terms. Any breach or unauthorized access attempt will trigger the provisions outlined in Clause 4.2b, including suspension of service. That was it. No warmth, no gloating, just precision. 15 minutes later, a new email popped into my inbox from Connor. Subject, Appreciate your work. Looking forward to collaborating. No punctuation at the end, not even a signature block. I read it once, then again. It was the written equivalent of a handshake with sweaty palms and forced eye contact. The kind of message people send when they've been told, firmly, to stay in their lane and to smile while doing it. I didn't respond, didn't forward it, didn't screenshot it for the group chat. I just archived it. Because power isn't proved by how loud you are. It's measured by how calmly you hold the line when others expect you to fold. While Connor tried to pivot the narrative, position himself as eager to collaborate and committed to infrastructure integrity, the rest of the exec team had already stopped pretending. Internal Slack threads went quiet. The risk mitigation doc got shelved. Helena started copying me directly on legal correspondence with the phrase, per existing terms, woven into every sentence. Even the CTO sent a brief apology masked as an FYI. We've reaffirmed license compliance and appreciate your continued support during this transitional phase. He never mentioned Connor by name. Didn't have to. Everyone knew who lit the match and who held the fire extinguisher. Wednesday's board sync was supposed to be routine. Quarterly update, product roadmap, maybe a few slides on user growth and cloud cost optimization. Nothing groundbreaking. Except this time, the founder was dialed in, and Connor was presenting. That alone should have tipped them off. He strutted in like he'd just closed a billion-dollar merger, dressed like his tailor had run out of fabric around the elbows again, and fired up a slideshow titled Repositioning for Platform Scalability. First slide, a vague graph. Second slide, buzzwords. Third slide, some phase rollout model that looked suspiciously like it was drawn in PowerPoint's smart art. Let's talk future state, he began. I believe our infrastructure can scale if we internalize core systems and eliminate legacy barriers. There it was. Legacy barriers. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. At slide 5, Helena, general counsel, leaned forward and cleared her throat. Not a cough, not a pause. A clear, deliberate signal. I'm going to stop us here, she said. Calm, precise, surgical. She tapped her tablet. The screen behind Connor flickered. His slides disappeared, replaced by a PDF, my licensing agreement, projected at full scale in front of every board member and the founder. Helena zoomed in on the clause. Section 4.2b, bolded and annotated. Then, quietly, but without hesitation, she turned to Connor. Did you or did you not make 3 access demands to this system without board approval while referring to the license holder as an operational barrier? The room went still. Connor blinked, mouth open, a second too slow. I was working under the assumption that Helena didn't blink. The license agreement has been active and enforceable since 2018. You were given a digital copy during onboarding. You signed the clause acknowledgement form. Twice. Someone near the end of the table muttered, "Oh my God." Then the founder spoke. Voice flat. No emotion, just one question. Is this true? The kind of question that doesn't invite spin. Connor's mouth opened again. Nothing came out. He looked to the CTO, who stared straight ahead like he was watching a slow-motion train derail. Helena waited. 1 beat. 2. Then turned back to the screen. I've already spoken to external counsel. The license is current, compliant, and legally insulated. Any attempt to internalize without a negotiated buyout exposes us to breach litigation and a 96-hour service risk window. The terms are not optional. Connor sat down. Not out of choice, because there was nowhere left to stand. The rest of the meeting went on. Brief updates, budget forecasts. No one mentioned scalability again. When the call ended, the founder didn't log off immediately. He paused, then said, "Let's ensure we never let confidence outpace comprehension again." And disconnected. Connor didn't say a word for the rest of the day. By the end of the month, the silence was louder than any Slack thread Connor had ever started. There was no formal announcement, no email blast, just a quiet calendar removal and a line buried in the internal newsletter. We wish Connor Vale all the best in his future endeavors. The kind of line that says everything by saying nothing at all. I didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. I had too many updates to push. Besides, the real win came in a slim envelope, hand-delivered by a paralegal I recognized from Helena's office. Inside, a revised licensing agreement, 5-year extension, a 17% increase in the annual licensing fee, and a new clause tucked neatly into Section 5.1. No administrative credential transfers, temporary or permanent, shall occur without the license holder's explicit, written consent. I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because it was the first time they'd put in writing what had always been true. The system wasn't just mine. The power was mine. I signed, not in celebration, but in recognition. A few days later, during the investor Q&A, the CTO gave a polished but noticeably careful update on our infrastructure posture. We've reinforced our reliance on strategic partnerships with external providers to ensure maximum system resilience and scalability. He didn't mention Tersus Systems, didn't have to. Everyone listening already knew. The founder sent me a short message that same week, just 1 sentence. "Thank you for protecting what we built." I didn't respond right away. Just reread it once, quietly, then archived it like all the others. By the following quarter, the engineering wiki had been updated. The old Platform Admin Protocol page now began with a note. Admin access is provisioned externally and cannot be reassigned internally. Do not escalate without board review. The highlight was that no one tried again. No whisper campaigns, no audit theater, no surprise invites. They knew where the line was now. They understood who drew it. And more importantly, they finally stopped pretending they could cross it.